sea was perfectly calm. No wind disturbed the sails, no waves touched the hull. No sound followed the ship as it drifted through the Caribbean, suspended between water and sky like something already forgotten by the world. For hours, the crew stood in silence, listening for anything. Creaking wood, flapping canvas, the cry of a seabird. Nothing came. Even the ocean seemed to be holding its breath. Some said a sea that calm was a blessing. The older sailors knew better. This kind of stillness was wrong. The ship had been sailing for days without progress. The sun rose and set, yet the horizon never changed. The water beneath them was dark, thicker somehow, reflecting the sky like a black mirror. At night, the stars looked distant and cold, as if they were watching, not guiding. Whispers began quietly. A murmur passed from bunk to bunk, from deck to deck. Men spoke of stories they had heard in port, of ships that angered the sea, of captains who challenged forces older than God. Each laugh sounded forced. Each prayer ended unfinished. At the center of it all stood the captain. His name was Helias Crowe. He did not shout, he did not threaten, he simply watched. Crowe stood at the helm, unmoving, hands resting on the wheel as if it were part of him. His eyes never left the horizon, even when there was nothing to see. Some swore his lips moved at night, forming words without sound. Others claimed he smiled when the sea went silent. By the third night, the first sign appeared. The compass spun wildly, then stopped. North meant nothing anymore. By the fourth night, the water in the barrels turned bitter. Men spat it back out, swearing it tasted of rust and rot. The food followed soon after, bread crawling with mold, meat blackened as if burned from the inside. Still, the captain refused to turn back. On the fifth night, the sounds began. Slow, deliberate. Footsteps echoed beneath the deck when no one was below. Chains dragged across the hold, metal scraping wood in long, patient movements. A low whisper rose from the hull itself, a language no sailor recognized yet somehow understood. Fear spread like disease. Men clutched charms, prayed to saints, carved symbols into the mast. One sailor swore he saw something moving beneath the surface. Too large, too close, circling the ship without disturbing the water. They begged the captain to change course. Helias Crowe said nothing. On the seventh night, the sea grew darker than the sky. Clouds swallowed the moon and the air felt heavy, pressing down on every breath. No wind came, yet the ship creaked as if straining against invisible currents. That was the night the captain finally moved. Without a word, Helias Crowe left the deck and descended into the hold alone. Lantern in hand, he passed between crates of stolen gold, relics ripped from temples and graves across the Caribbean. Objects no sailor dared touch. Objects taken from islands where screams once echoed into the jungle. There, in the deepest part of the ship, the captain knelt. He spoke softly at first, then louder. Words not meant for human tongues. Promises not meant for the living. He offered his soul to the sea. He offered his crew as payment. He offered the ship itself, swearing it would never surrender, never sink, never escape what he was about to unleash. The moment the final word left his mouth, the ocean answered. The wind returned in a scream. The ship lurched forward violently as if grabbed by unseen hands. The sea rose, not as waves, but as towering walls of darkness that blocked out the horizon. Wood cracked. Masts groaned like dying animals. Lanterns shattered, plunging the deck into chaos. Men were hurled overboard, swallowed without a splash. Others screamed as shadows wrapped around their legs, dragging them across the planks. Some collapsed, clawing at their own faces, convinced something inside them was trying to get out. Above it all, the captain stood smiling. By dawn, the storm was gone. The sea was calm once more. The ship still floated. The sails still moved. But every soul aboard was gone, and somewhere in the silence a curse had taken root, one that would never release its captain nor the ship he had damned to sail forever. The Caribbean in the early 18th century was a place ruled by uncertainty. Trade routes were dangerous, maps were incomplete, and the sea was feared as much as it was relied upon. Sailors believed the ocean was alive, watching, listening, remembering every insult committed upon its waters. It was during this age of superstition and blood-soaked sails that the ship Providence began its final voyage. Once a respected merchant vessel, It had been captured and transformed into a pirate ship, its decks hardened by violence and greed. Gold filled its hold, taken from coastal towns and forgotten islands, along with strange relics no one aboard fully understood. At its helm stood Captain Helias Crowe. Crowe was not known for rage or madness. He was calm, calculating, and deeply respected by his crew. He believed fear was more powerful than force, and silence more commanding than threats. Men followed him because they trusted his judgment, and because they feared disappointing him. The journey began like any other. Clear skies, favorable winds, a crew confident they would soon reach safe harbor to divide their spoils. But as days passed, something changed. The wind weakened, the sea grew unnaturally still. Progress slowed, then stopped altogether. No storms came. No explanation followed. The ship drifted in place, surrounded by endless water and an unmoving horizon. Nights grew heavier, quieter. Even seasoned sailors felt unease settle into their bones. They did not yet know it, but the voyage had already crossed an invisible boundary, one that no ship was meant to pass. And at the center of it all stood a captain who would soon make a choice that transformed a simple journey into a legend whispered in fear across the Caribbean. The first sign was not fear. It was confusion. On the third day without wind, the crew of the Providence began to notice how wrong the silence felt. The sails hung limp, refusing to move, yet the sea around the ship remained smooth, unbroken by even the smallest ripple. Oars were lowered, but the water resisted them, thick and heavy, as if the ocean itself were holding the vessel in place. Men checked the rigging, others scanned the horizon. Nothing explained it. By nightfall, the unease had grown sharper. The stars above looked distant, faint as if seen through a veil. The usual sounds of a living ship, creaking wood, shifting ropes, murmured voices, had faded. Every step echoed too loudly, every whisper felt exposed. The compass was brought to the captain. Its needle spun wildly, then froze, pointing nowhere. A murmur passed through the crew. Some crossed themselves. Others laughed nervously, claiming it was broken. Captain Helias Crowe examined it in silence, then calmly ordered it returned below deck. No concern showed on his face, but his eyes lingered on the dark water longer than usual. That night, no one slept well. Dreams were filled with drowning, with hands pulling from below, with voices calling names from the deep. One sailor woke screaming, convinced something had whispered directly into his ear. Another swore he heard slow footsteps pacing the deck long after the watch had changed. By morning, the water barrels were fouled. The liquid inside had turned cloudy, sour, reeking of decay. The cook cut into a salted slab of meat only to find it blackened from within, crawling with rot. Panic stirred. Supplies were checked again and again, but every barrel told the same story. The sea had not taken them by storm or battle. It was starving them instead. The crew gathered, their voices rising. They demanded answers. Some begged to turn back. Others spoke of bad omens, of waters sailors were warned never to cross. One old deckhand whispered a word no one liked to hear. A curse. Helias Crowe listened without interruption. When the noise finally died, he spoke only once. "We hold course." His voice was steady, final. No anger, no explanation. That was when the sounds began. Low at first, almost imagined. A faint dragging noise from below the deck, like chains shifting against wood. Then whispers, woven into the hull itself, rising and falling with the slow breathing of the ship. Men froze where they stood. No one had gone below. No one volunteered to check. The Providence drifted onward, trapped in unmoving waters, carrying a crew that now understood something was watching them, patiently, waiting for a choice to be made. And Captain Helias Crowe, standing alone at the helm, was already listening. By the sixth night, fear ruled the Providence more completely than any captain ever had. Men avoided the edges of the deck, certain that something beneath the surface was following them. Others refused to sleep below, choosing exhaustion over the certainty that the whispers grew louder in the dark. The sound of chains no longer came only at night. It echoed at random hours, slow and deliberate, as if something was being dragged back and forth with purpose. No one had found the source. A sailor named Thomas Hale was the first to disappear. He had been sent below to check the remaining water barrels. When he did not return, 2 men followed. They found the lantern still burning, its light trembling against the walls of the hold. The barrels were untouched. The floor was dry. Thomas was gone. No struggle, no blood, only deep scrape marks in the wood, leading toward the hull itself. Panic spread openly now. Voices rose in accusation. Some blamed the stolen relics in the hold. Others blamed the captain. A few demanded they throw the gold overboard, anything to appease the sea. Helias Crowe watched them all with an unreadable expression. That night, another man vanished, then another. By morning, the crew was broken. They gathered before the captain, eyes sunken, hands shaking, faith exhausted. They begged him to turn back, to abandon the cargo, to do something, anything, to stop what was happening. Crowe remained silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "The sea does not take," he said calmly. "It answers." Before anyone could stop him, the captain turned and descended into the hold alone. The lantern light vanished below deck. Minutes passed, then more. The whispers rose into a chorus. The ship groaned as if in pain. Those on deck felt it then, a shift in the air, a pressure pressing inward from all sides, as though the ocean itself were leaning closer to listen. Deep below, Helias Crowe knelt among gold and forbidden relics. His voice carried upward, distorted, layered with something not his own. Words older than prayer spilled into the hull, binding promise to punishment, will to eternity. The ship shuddered violently. Above deck, the sea finally moved, not with waves, but with intent. And every man aboard the Providence understood too late that their captain had not chosen to save them. He had chosen to never lose. The moment the final word left the captain's mouth, the Providence screamed. It was not a sound made by wind or thunder, but by wood itself. An agonized groan that rippled through the hull, traveling from the keel to the highest mast. The ship lurched violently to port, throwing men against the railings as if an unseen force had seized it from below. Then the sea moved, not in waves, not in storms. The water rose as a single, massive body, surrounding the ship in towering walls of blackness. The horizon vanished. The sky closed in. It felt as though the Providence had been pulled into a vast living chamber made entirely of ocean. Men screamed. Lanterns shattered across the deck, plunging everything into chaos. Rain fell sideways, sharp and freezing, stinging like needles against exposed skin. The sails snapped tight with a deafening crack, though no wind could be felt, only pressure, crushing and relentless. One sailor was lifted clean off his feet and hurled into the darkness. He did not fall. He was taken. Another clung to the rigging, fingers bleeding, crying out for mercy to gods he had not spoken to in years. The ropes around him twisted suddenly, tightening like coiled serpents, snapping his body hard against the mast. The sea was not angry. It was deliberate. From the depths came shapes, vast shadows rolling just beneath the surface, circling the ship with slow, predatory patience. The water glowed faintly around them, illuminated by something deep below, as if the ocean itself had opened its eyes. The crew fought not to survive, but to understand. Some dropped to their knees, begging forgiveness from the sea, from God, from anyone listening. Others turned on each other, madness flaring in their eyes, convinced this was punishment brought by stolen gold or broken oaths. Steel flashed in the darkness as fear erased brotherhood. Above it all, Captain Helias Crowe emerged from the hold. He stepped onto the deck as if walking into calm weather. Rain slid off his coat without soaking it. The wind bent around him, refusing to touch him directly. His eyes reflected the pale glow rising from the water, and for the first time, the crew understood the truth with horrifying clarity. The curse had accepted him. Crowe walked to the helm, steady and unhurried. gripping the wheel as the ship twisted beneath him. The Providence no longer drifted. It surged forward, cutting through the water as though guided by invisible currents. Men were dragged across the deck, pulled toward the railings by forces they could not see. One sailor screamed as something wrapped around his ankle and yanked him screaming into the sea. His cry cut off instantly, as if his voice had been swallowed whole. Another tried to jump voluntarily, choosing the unknown depths over what hunted them aboard the ship. The moment his body broke the surface, the water closed over him without a ripple. No splash, no trace. The shadows beneath the ship grew bolder now, pressing close enough that the deck boards vibrated with their movement. Long, pale hands rose from the water, fingers stretching, grasping, dragging slowly along the hull as if savoring the texture of the wood. Faces followed. Not fresh, not living. Bloated and hollow-eyed, mouths frozen in silent screams, they drifted beside the ship, keeping pace. Some were crewmen already lost. Others were older, far older, wearing the tattered remains of uniforms from forgotten eras. The sea was not collecting payment. It was showing its trophies. A young deckhand named Matthew fell backward, staring into the water, as a face rose directly beneath him. His brother's face, pale and empty, lips moving without sound. Matthew screamed and scrambled away, only to collide with another sailor, who stabbed him in blind terror. Blood spilled across the deck. The moment it touched the wood, it vanished, seeping between the planks as though absorbed. The ship fed on it. The storm intensified. Thunder cracked overhead, yet no lightning followed. The darkness was complete, broken only by the sickly glow beneath the waves. The mast snapped with a violent crack, crashing onto the deck and crushing two men instantly. Still, the ship did not slow. Crowe did not move. He stood at the helm, his mouth curved into the faintest smile, eyes wide with a mix of triumph and dawning horror. He had demanded dominion over the sea. Instead, he had bound himself to it. One by one, the crew fell. Some were dragged screaming into the depths. Others vanished where they stood, pulled through the deck itself as if the wood had turned to liquid. A few simply collapsed, their bodies emptying of life in an instant, eyes staring as something unseen passed through them. The whispers rose into a roar. Voices overlapped, layered, ancient. Languages long dead echoed through the storm, all repeating the same truth in different tongues. The debt is due. The oath is sealed. The captain remains. By the time the sun rose, the storm was gone. The sea lay flat once more, calm and glassy, reflecting a pale sky that looked almost innocent. The Providence drifted silently, its sails torn, its deck scarred, its mast broken, but still afloat. No bodies lay upon it. No blood stained the wood. No sign of struggle remained. Only Helias Crowe stood at the helm. He blinked against the morning light, expecting pain, exhaustion, regret. None came. His body felt unchanged, untouched by the night of terror. Yet something was wrong. He listened. There was no sound of footsteps, no voices, no breathing but his own. He walked the deck slowly, calling out names. His voice echoed back to him, hollow and distorted as if spoken inside a tomb. He peered over the railings into the water below. The sea stared back. Reflections did not behave as they should. His face shimmered strangely, lagging behind his movements as if uncertain whether it still belonged to him. When he reached toward the surface, the water recoiled slightly, then smoothed itself again. Days passed, or nights. Time no longer marked itself clearly. The sun rose and set, but its path felt wrong. Too fast some days, impossibly slow on others. Hunger never came. Thirst never returned. Sleep visited him only in fragments, haunted by dreams of sinking endlessly through black water. The ship sailed on without wind. The compass remained frozen. The Providence had become something else. On the 10th cycle of light and darkness, Crowe heard footsteps behind him. He turned sharply. The deck was empty. Then he heard them again. Slow, wet footsteps, pacing him from a distance. He followed the sound toward the bow, his hand resting on his sword. A figure emerged from the fog. One of his crew, or what remained of him. The man's skin was pale and swollen, eyes clouded, jaw hanging loosely as though unhinged. Seaweed tangled in his hair, and water poured from his clothes despite the dry deck beneath his feet. He did not speak. He only stared. Crowe stepped back. The figure smiled, then another appeared, and another. Soon the deck was lined with them, his crew, standing silently, watching him with expressions that held no anger, no mercy, only patience. They did not attack. They did not accuse. They simply waited. Crowe understood then. The curse had not ended with their deaths. It had only begun. The ship resumed its endless journey, cutting through waters no map would ever chart, carrying a captain who could no longer die, and a crew that would never leave. And somewhere deep beneath the hull, something vast shifted contentedly. The sea had answered, and it was satisfied, for now. Elias Crowe learned the truth in fragments. At first it was small things, a splinter driven deep into his palm that closed before blood could fall, a cracked rib from a violent fall that healed before the pain could fully form. Hunger never came. Thirst never followed. Sleep arrived only in shallow moments, and when it did, it brought no rest. The captain could not die. The realization did not strike him all at once. It grew slowly, sinking deeper with every passing day until it became impossible to deny. Whatever bargain he had made in the hold of the Providence, it had not granted him command over the sea. It had chained him to it. Time unraveled aboard the ship. Days stretched unnaturally long, nights passed in moments, and the sun's path across the sky felt wrong, too slow, then too fast, as if the world itself no longer agreed on how time should move. Crowe tried to count the days, carving marks into the rail near the helm, but the markings betrayed him. Some vanished, others doubled. Soon the count meant nothing. The ship sailed on without wind. The sea remained unnaturally calm, broken only by a low, constant murmur beneath the hull like distant breathing. The crew began to return. At first it was only one, a figure standing at the far end of the deck, pale and dripping seawater that vanished before touching the wood. His eyes were clouded, empty, his mouth slack. He did not speak. He did not move. He only watched. Crowe shouted at him, ordering him back to his post, demanding an answer. The words echoed uselessly across the deck. When Crowe took a step forward, the figure dissolved into mist, leaving the deck empty once more. But the silence did not last. More appeared in the nights that followed. Sometimes two, sometimes dozens. His crew stood along the railings near the mast beside the cannons, always silent, always watching. Their clothes were torn and waterlogged, their skin pale and swollen, yet none of them decayed further. They were preserved, as if the sea refused to let them fully rot. They never accused him. They never forgave him. They simply remained. Crowe began to understand that they were not haunting him out of hatred. They were reminders, proof of payment already taken. At times the Providence passed close to land. Crowe saw islands at dawn, green, alive, untouched by the fog that followed him. Smoke rose from distant villages. Bells rang faintly across the water. Hope stirred painfully in his chest. He tried to steer toward them. The wheel turned easily beneath his hands, but the ship did not respond. The bow shifted just enough to avoid the shore, sliding away as if repelled by an unseen force. No matter how he fought it, the Providence refused to approach land. The sea would not let him leave. Other ships began to cross their path, merchant vessels first, fat with cargo, crews visible on deck, laughing, unaware. Crowe shouted warnings until his voice broke. He fired flares meant to draw attention, fired cannons wide to force them to change course. None reacted. As they drew closer, the fog thickened unnaturally. The Providence slipped into it like a shadow. When the fog lifted, the other ship was gone. Sometimes wreckage appeared days later. Broken planks, torn sails, floating crates. Sometimes nothing surfaced at all. Once, Crowe found a lifeboat drifting beside the ship. Inside it were deep gouges, claw marks carved from the inside out. No bodies, no blood. Crowe pushed it away with shaking hands, and the sea swallowed it without resistance. Warships came eventually. They did not flee. They fired. Cannonballs tore through the fog and struck the Providence head-on. Crowe felt the impact ripple through the deck, but no damage followed. The iron shot passed through the hull as though the ship were made of smoke, splashing harmlessly into the water beyond. The warship did not get a second volley. The sea beneath it darkened. The water stilled. Fog rose like a living wall. By morning, the warship was gone. Crowe stopped trying to intervene after that. Sleep became rare. When it came, it brought memories instead of dreams. Faces of sailors begging him to turn back. The sound of chains dragging beneath the water. The moment he spoke the final word of the curse, over and over again. Regret came late. It settled into him quietly, heavier than fear. He walked the empty deck, staring at the places where his crew had once stood, trying to remember their names. Some he could not. The sea had taken even that. The whispers grew clearer as time passed. They no longer mocked him. They taught him. They showed him visions of other ships, other captains across centuries. Men who had made bargains, kings who had offered blood, fleets that vanished from history without explanation. All of them had believed they were choosing power. All of them had been wrong. Crowe finally understood what he had done. He had not cursed the ship. He had crowned it. The Providence was no longer merely a vessel. It was an extension of the sea's will, a moving threshold between worlds. And Helias Crowe was not its master. He was its witness. Condemned to sail forever, unable to die, unable to escape, watching as the sea continued to collect what it was owed. One ship, one crew, one soul at a time. The sea changed the night Helias Crowe finally listened. Until then, it had been a presence, vast, patient, watching. It surrounded the Providence like a living thing but never addressed him directly. It took ships. It returned ghosts. It bent time and space to its will. Yet it had never spoken to him in a way he could truly understand. That night, the sea spoke with intention. The sky was unnaturally clear, stripped of stars, stripped of moonlight, as if darkness itself had been polished smooth. The water lay flat and black, reflecting nothing. The Providence drifted without sound, its sails hanging limp, though it continued forward with quiet certainty. Crowe stood alone at the helm, his hands resting on the wheel out of habit rather than need. He no longer tried to steer. He had learned that the ship went where it wished, guided by something far older than wind or compass. Then the whispers rose, not from the air, not from the ship, from below. They pressed upward through the hull, seeping into the deck, into his bones, into his skull. They were no longer fragmented voices or half-remembered cries. They spoke as one, layered and vast, like an ocean given language. "You hear us now." Crowe staggered back, gripping the rail. Pain flared briefly behind his eyes, then faded, another reminder that even suffering had been rationed for him. "What do you want?" he asked aloud, his voice breaking the silence. The water rippled, though no wind stirred. "What you have already given." Images flooded his mind without warning. He saw the Providence as it once was, newly built, its hull unscarred, its crew alive and laughing. He saw the night of the storm, the desperation that had driven him to the hold, the blood that had soaked into the planks as he spoke words never meant for human tongues. Then the vision shifted. He saw the sea as it truly was. Not water, not waves, but something endless and aware, threaded with paths of memory and death. Every ship that vanished had not been destroyed. It had been taken, preserved, stored like relics in a vast, submerged graveyard beyond time. Crowe fell to his knees. "You didn't save us," he whispered. "You claimed us." The sea did not deny it. "All things that cross us are ours. You simply asked to remain." The realization struck harder than any cannon fire. He had not been spared. He had been singled out, chosen to remain conscious. The deck creaked softly as the Providence slowed. For the first time since the curse, the ship nearly stopped. The water around it darkened further, thickening into something closer to ink than sea. Shapes moved beneath the surface. They rose slowly, deliberately. Masts first, then hulls, then torn sails drifting like shrouds. Dozens of ships surrounded the Providence, emerging from below as if summoned. Ancient galleons with rotted wood, warships split open by unseen forces, merchant vessels frozen in the moment of their destruction. Their decks were crowded, not with living crews but with silhouettes standing shoulder to shoulder. The taken, their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting nothing. They did not moan. They did not beg. They waited. Crowe understood then. This was not a warning. This was an invitation. "You want me to join them," he said. The sea rippled again, and the whisper softened. Not kind, but patient. "You already have." The figures on the surrounding ships turned toward him in unison. Crowe recognized faces among them, men he had doomed, captains who had cursed his name in their final moments, sailors from centuries he could not place, all bound, all silent, all watching him. A sudden memory surfaced, one the sea had not shown him, a choice he had never made. "What if I refuse?" Crowe asked. For the first time, the sea hesitated. The water beneath the Providence churned slightly, as if disturbed. "You cannot refuse what is." Anger flared in Crowe's chest, hot, sharp, useless. "Then why speak to me at all?" he shouted. "Why show me this?" The whispers deepened, growing heavier. Because the tide changes. The surrounding ships began to sink again, slowly descending back into the black depths. One by one they vanished, leaving the Providence alone once more. But something had shifted. The silence felt different, expectant. Crowe remained on his knees long after the sea stilled. From that night on, the ship's path changed. They sailed toward storms instead of away from them, toward shipping lanes thick with traffic, toward places where the sea's hunger was strongest. The fog no longer hid the Providence entirely. Some ships glimpsed it before vanishing, long enough to spread rumors. Stories began to circulate among sailors, of a black ship that sailed without wind, of a captain who stood alone at the helm, pale and unmoving, of crews that vanished without a sound, leaving calm seas behind. Crowe heard these stories whispered by dying men pulled briefly onto his deck before being claimed fully by the sea. He learned that fear traveled faster than truth, and the sea encouraged it. Each encounter made the whispers clearer. The sea spoke to him of balance, of debt, of a hunger that could never be satisfied, only managed. Ships were not taken at random. Some were spared. Others were marked long before they crossed his path. And Crowe was the instrument. The realization hollowed him. He was no longer merely a witness. He was a gate. One night after centuries, or perhaps only weeks, Crowe asked the question he had avoided since the curse. Is there an end? The sea was silent for a long time. Then, finally, when the last story is told. The answer chilled him more than any storm. As long as sailors spoke of the Providence, as long as fear kept the legend alive, the ship would sail. The curse fed not only on blood and steel, but on memory. Crowe rose slowly and walked the deck. The crew appeared again, lining the rails. This time they were clearer, more solid, almost whole. For the first time, one stepped forward. It was his first mate. He opened his mouth, and though no sound came, Crowe understood. This was not punishment. It was perpetuity. The sea had found its voice, and through Helias Crowe, it would never fall silent again. No one knows when the Providence was last seen for the first time. Sailors' accounts disagree. Some place it in the early years of the great trade routes, others centuries later when maps had already begun to lie. The only constant is the description: a black-hulled ship drifting without wind, its sails hanging heavy and still, its deck unnaturally quiet, and always a single figure at the helm. Elias Crowe no longer remembered the sound of his own heartbeat. If it still existed, it had long since learned to match the rhythm of the waves. He stood as he always did, hands resting on the wheel, eyes fixed on a horizon that never drew closer. The sea no longer needed to speak to him. It spoke through him. The Providence had become a legend that fed itself. Each whispered warning in a harbor tavern, each prayer muttered before a voyage, each child frightened into obedience by tales of the cursed ship. Every word tightened the chains that bound Crowe to the sea. Memory had replaced iron. Fear had replaced rope. Time lost meaning entirely. Empires rose and fell beyond the fog. Flags changed, languages shifted, yet the sea remained, and so did the ship. Crowe watched vessels pass bearing markings he did not recognize, carrying weapons he could not name, crewed by men who believed the ocean had been tamed. They were always wrong. Sometimes the sea spared them, sometimes it did not. When it chose not to, the fog would rise, and the Providence would glide forward in silence. There was no battle, no screams, only absence. Those who vanished joined the others below, becoming part of the vast, unseen armada resting beneath the waves. Crowe no longer counted them. Regret faded with time, worn smooth by repetition. In its place grew something colder, understanding. The sea was not cruel. It was not merciful. It was inevitable. He had not been punished for defying it. He had been preserved to remember it. On rare nights when the water lay calm and the fog thinned, Crowe would see reflections in the sea that were not his own. Faces looking up from below, countless and patient. The taken did not hate him. They needed him. For without a witness, their stories would dissolve into nothing. And the sea, ancient and vast, did not forget. But it required a voice. Far away in warm ports and quiet coves, sailors still spoke of the Providence. Some claimed to have seen it and lived. Others swore their fathers had vanished after spotting a black ship on the horizon. Maps marked certain waters as cursed, though no one remembered why. They only knew better than to linger. And so the legend endured. As long as ships crossed the sea, as long as fear followed them, as long as stories were told in the dark, the Providence would sail, and Elias Crowe would stand at its helm, neither alive nor dead, neither captain nor prisoner, forever guiding the sea's memory through the world. For the last voyage is never the last. It is only the one that is remembered.